So here begins our sermon time. I'm going to keep it short because we've heard a lot of things already this morning. This is the reason why we're meant to be vegetarians. No, that is not the meaning of First Daniel. In fact, if you know me, I like my steaks. But that's not the point. This year, and in a couple weeks, we will be voting at our annual general meeting in our church for this particular statement to be the vision of our church. And in anticipation of that, a lot of our understanding of what we're going to be preaching about over the year is going to follow what our vision is. And it is, we are a caring community rooted in and growing in Christ. We seek to extend God's love to everyone around us through gracious hospitality and authentic relationships. So what I have on the screen right now is a preview of the entire year of preaching. We're going to spend 7 weeks in Daniel. Next week is not going to be on Daniel because we're having a special beach baptism. We'll tell you more about that. It's at 10:30 in the morning at Locarno Beach. So don't show up here at 3:30 next week. Go there, and we have some baptisms coming up. But in the rest of the time between here and somewhere in October, we will be covering Daniel chapter 1 through 6, and then chapter 9. Because Daniel is divided oftentimes into narratives in the first half, and the second half is his visions. And one of the visions I thought would be really representative is the one found in chapter 9 that speaks about his prayer and how vision comes into play into that. So Daniel is on the front end of our summer. Then we're going to move into the book of Acts. Oh, and there's a reason why I select Daniel and all these books is that they fulfill what we talk about in terms of being engaged with the world no matter where we are. Does that make sense? So we are a church that believes that, yes, we meet on Sundays, perhaps, but you are always the church no matter where you are. So the old saying, some of you might remember, I used to say it almost every week, which is, we don't just go to church. We are the church. So wherever you go, you represent God's people. And that's what Daniel does. And of course, we want to look at the book of Acts. And here we're only covering the first 2 chapters as kind of a part 1. And because we'll enter into Advent. And during Advent, we're going to celebrate that season week after week. And so this will cover to the end of December. And when we get into the next year, and that's 2024, we are going to get into the parables of Jesus that are about engagement. That are about what does the gospel mean in different contexts. And then in the season of Lent, that is the weeks preceding Easter, we're going to be looking at the Old Testament prophet Malachi. I don't know if you've ever heard sermons on Malachi before. You're going to get that chance. This is where we're going to find Malachi. It's about 6 chapters in. And then we're going to follow into Acts again. And from there, we're going to cover chapter 3 through 8. And this begins to be the early parts of the church. And you'll notice that we don't actually get to cover all of Acts next year, at least coming into August. But Acts is going to be an ongoing series in different parts. So we're just going to get to chapter 8 by the end of, I think, around June. And then we're going to move into the Psalms in the summer season. And there, of course, there's so many Psalms. We selected a good number of them. A lectionary will be provided for you if you want to hook into our church email system or network. We'll send along our lectionary, and that will give you the entire layout of every passage that we're going to be preaching through in this next year. But this will give you an understanding of the arc of what our church always thinks about. And that is, we want to be people who are rooted in Christ in our identity. We want to be people who understand the mission that we have in our world no matter what we're doing. And we also want to explore how this mission is played out. And I'm so excited that we had all these student ministry people sort of, give us a view of what that's like in their perspective and in their lives. So let's get into this. The book of Daniel. We're just going to do the first chapter. It was read for us by Kim. And I entitled it Faithful Exiles. And I just want to give a few points for us to think about. As you know, at the beginning of the story, Jerusalem is laid siege to by Nebuchadnezzar, and the people are taken out of their land. They're exiled. And this happens 2,600 years ago. It's a little bit shorter than about AD 590, 580. Not 80, BC, before Christ. Or in the secular terms, it's before the Common Era. But this is 600 years before Jesus' birth. This is where this occurs. And the nation of Israel and Judah, in the north, it was a split nation. It finally comes apart. And they have puppet kings now. And what happens is a lot of people are exiled into different places. Here you'll see what happened to Israel was that the Assyrian Empire was the power before the Babylonians. And they came, laid siege to Israel, completely destroyed it pretty much. In Samaria was their capital city. And they just take all the people and run them out. So that Israel, which are the majority of the tribes of Israel, are scattered completely. The same thing is going to happen because Babylonia will take over Assyria. They overthrow the Assyrians, and they will come in and finish the job because this is a really important trade route, the King's Highway. It will run all the way along this Mesopotamian crescent. This is all desert down here. And that's why they always travel like this. You know this? It's always kind of like up and down. This is desert. Nobody's here. There's nowhere to go. It's not great roads until now. And this is the way to get into Egypt. If they're waging wars, Egypt will run up this way. The Babylonians, the Syrians will come down this way. The Hittites, so they all do their thing. But what will happen here at around 600 BC is Jerusalem is overthrown by the Babylonians, and they will deport the people into Babylonia, which is in this region. The city of Babylon is here, and of course Nineveh, which is the center of Assyria, was here. And then they will sort of seed new people into the Israel's region, which is what the Assyrians did. The Assyrians had one policy in foreign policy, that was destroy everybody and take them out and replace them. The Babylonians had a little bit of different policy, is that we're going to raid this place and we're just going to take the people out. But they weren't as interested in destroying, but they wanted to get the best, which is where we then will get into the Daniel story. If you want a modern understanding of what these distances are, here you go. Google Maps does the job. Yes, they have highways now over here through the desert, but you don't want to go there. There's nothing interesting. There's nowhere to, there's no McDonald's or nothing along this route. So you usually go around this way, and it is about 2,000 kilometers. 27 hours by car kind of thing. But this is a route that would have been similar to the one that Daniel and his friends and all the exiles of Jerusalem, of Judah, would have taken. Now, this is in a modern sense. But here's the first thing, and I don't have the time to go in-depth into the particular passage because of the time. But if you remember what was read for us, he has 3 friends. And they know who they are. This is the interesting part. They were deported. Now, none of you, I don't think, have ever been deported or exiled, although you might feel like it. How many people here are here from somewhere else to go to school? Yes? A few? Okay. You haven't been deported. But you've moved somewhere across Canada. How many people here are originally from Vancouver? That means the rest of you had to come from somewhere else. Right? A lot of you had to uproot from maybe your families, or uproot your whole family themselves, or leave and then go to a new place. So those of you who aren't from Vancouver, myself included, I grew up in Winnipeg, we had to leave those places. And I still remember going to study in Ontario. So there was one uprooting. And then from Ontario, I came over here to study. And so there's a lot of traveling involved. And so this is what happens with Daniel and his friends. They are displaced peoples. Now also notice a lot of you are not native Canadians in the sense of indigenous peoples. I think the majority of us here might not be. Anyone with indigenous blood here? Okay, that means we are all immigrants. So whether you grew up in Vancouver or not, at some point we uprooted. At some point we moved. And here's an interesting thing, especially for those of you who come from Christian communities and step into places like university, or those of you who come from Christian families and are sent into elementary school that is not Christian, or high school that isn't Christian, you are stepping into a completely different culture. And you know what happens to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah? The text tells us that they were given new names. A lot of times when we talk about Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, we call them Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I don't think they would have liked that. Those are the names that were given to them by the Babylonians. And here I've written for you what their names actually mean. Daniel means, God is my judge. Hananiah means, God is gracious. And he's using the part is the covenant name of God. Mishael is, who is what God is, or who is as great as God. And Azariah's name is, God has helped them. When they use those names God, they mean the God of Israel. But the new names that were given to them, Belteshazzar means Bel, the God of the Babylonians will protect. Shadrach, the Ak part, is inspired by the God Aku. That's what it means. I'm inspired by the God Aku. Meshach, I belong to Aku, the God of the Babylonians. And Abednego, I am a servant of Nego, the God. So Babylon had these other gods. They had this different culture. And when they entered into that land, they would listen to their names then perhaps, and they'll say, I don't know how to pronounce that. That's different. And not only the changing of the name in the Bible is a big deal. It's the changing, it's indication of your identity. Do you know what your name means? The name that you were given. And do you know why you were given that name? Now, sometimes your parents didn't think about it that much. Sometimes they did. But however it works, in biblical times, the name matters. Because if you are a person of God's people, you are always affiliated with whom? With God. With the God of Abraham and Isaac. The God of the Old Testament. But in other cultures, the allegiance begins to change. So when we enter into our cultures, whether you're in elementary school, whether you're in graduate school, whether you are coming from a family of faith and working in a world that is without faith, in the hospital, in the school, in the financial sector, in real estate, whatever it is that you do, the people around you have a different culture. They may have a different God. And when you speak to someone and you ask them the question, why do you do what you do? The answer is because I want to be rich. I want to be famous. I want to be influential. An influencer. I want to make a difference in the world by making a name for myself. But what is it about the people of God that's different? We are not making a name for ourselves. We lift up one name. And not only do we lift up that one name, the name of Jesus, we bring a different way of doing things. Our pursuit is not of wealth, but it's the distribution of wealth that brings justice. That is in God's heart. And so these people are being challenged. Daniel and his friends are being challenged by the transforming of their identity. Psychologically, I was taught once in my psychology class, and some of you are in psychology, that every time someone enters the room, you become a slightly different person because you adjust to them to accommodate. Now, this is not to say you shouldn't accommodate. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. But what happens when you begin to drop your understanding of being a follower of God so that you might be accepted into another group? So you can fly under the radar. So you can have advantages. And so your identity becomes an issue. The other thing then is that Daniel and his friends actually wanted to keep their identity. Daniel says, I don't want the food from the king's table because it defiles me. Now, there are people who go and write books about what Daniel ate. I got to tell you, that's just snake oil, okay? Don't believe it. And yes, it's good to eat vegetables. Your mom and dad told you to do it, so maybe you should. But this is not the point of Daniel. And just like Kim told us, food represents your culture. There's a reason why you can't eat with certain people or certain people can't eat with you. Because if your food is not halal, if the animal has not been killed a certain way, if things have not been cooked a certain way, they will not eat it. And what happens, it begins to separate peoples. It defines who they are in some way, shape, or form because of culture. But in Daniel's understanding, a lot of commentators might say because the king's table, because of the relationship with his gods, you notice how they tried to change all their names to relate with their gods? That food may have been dedicated also to idols. So when they sort of prepare that food, there's this impression that perhaps, I'm not sure if this is what it was, it's not in the scriptures directly, but this is an impression that some of the cultural experts would say. The food that came from the king's table might have been offered to idols or other gods. And therefore, from Daniel's perspective, that would not be cool. But whatever it was, and it wasn't because he didn't like, hamburgers or he didn't like dim sum. It's not that kind of thing. There was something much deeper about it. Something about what the people of Babylon did not eat separated him and his friends. And it was a representation of their own identity. But notice this. In their interaction with Ashpenaz, try to name your kids that these days. Ashpenaz, who's in charge of them, he goes, I can't eat this. Can you give us something else? And he goes, well, the king's going to have my head if you guys are all looking like, scrawny after. And so they actually interact with him. God, we're told, gives them favor with Ashpenaz. He has compassion on them. So God lays out something in Ashpenaz's heart, this Babylonian. And he says, okay. And they're actually not going to push Ashpenaz. They said, let us try it for just 10 days, right? And see how we are. If we're looking something bad, then we'll change things up. But Ashpenaz, so they're reasonable. They are attentive. They're not just forcing their way through. We are Israelites, we will crush you. It's not like we hate your food, and then stomp on it. It's not like that. It's more like, can you just give us something else? I mean, this is not. We can't eat this. It doesn't. There's something about it. And I don't know if Ashpenaz had explained it fully to Ashpenaz, but he says, "Oh man, this is tough." He said, "Oh, just try 10 days. Is it okay? 10 days?" So they're listening to Ashpenaz because Ashpenaz says, "Look, if you guys look bad, the king is going to chop my head off." So they begin to understand. They're listening to Ashpenaz. They're not demanding. They're attentive, but they are still, insistent in some ways, and they compromise and they try to smooth things over. Well, you know how the story goes. At the end of that time, they are better. I don't know, maybe it was bad meat. Who knows? Maybe it was tainted food. But they are fine with the vegetables and water. I'm sorry, I'm not sure I can handle that kind of diet myself. But they did it. They did it not because it was the food that did not appeal to them. They did it because they wanted to honor their identity as God's people. When you're on campus, when you are at your high school, or in your workplace, people have different goals and they have different cultures, and they may have things and do things that are harmful, not only to society, but to themselves, or worse, to others. Their sexual ethics and morals might be different. Their understanding of dealing with stress through the use of pharmaceuticals or drugs, the ways that they blow off steam, the ways that we entertain ourselves. These become the things that our culture is shaped by, and our hearts are shaped by. And Daniel and his friends are of the world, they are in the world, but not of the world, if that makes sense. Just like you are in your school, just like you are in your place of work, just as you who are pursuing a career and a future. But as God's people, we ask this question: what does God have for me? Daniel and his friends honestly did not have that much of a choice. But many of you do. Many of us do. And the choices that you make today, especially out of high school or out of university, as you look towards your career, and even if you're older now and you've been in it for a long time, the continuing choices that you make have consequences and an effect upon yourself, upon those around you, and upon the world, the society in which you live. We're going to be tracking Daniel in the next few months to see where this ends up for him. And it's a pretty interesting. Some of you have read the book of Daniel. You know what happens. But we want to look at it a little deeper and ask, what he has done, what does that mean for me 2,600 years later? How do I live as God's person? And the interesting part for Daniel and his friends is this: they continue to be faithful and serve the king of Babylon, the enemy of Israel. But they continue to carry the name of God in their hearts, as we do in a culture that's highly secular. And more than that, we bring a message of the gospel of Jesus to the people around us today. Is your faith in the open? Doesn't mean that you have to, wear the Jesus shirt all day and every day of the week. But when they ask, what are you doing this weekend? What do you say? Where are you going? Oh, I'm going to InterVarsity. I'm going to Power to Change. I'm going to my Bible study. What is that? You don't hide that. Just like Daniel and his friends did not hide who they were. Do you live out your faith wherever you are? And do you think about how that faith might be expressed among your friends? Some of you know I do martial arts. And they always, at some point, someone asks you, what do you do? And I say, I'm a pastor. And they'll say, what? And I go, have you not heard of Jacob wrestling the angel? And it goes on. And finally, the methodology. Daniel and his friends integrated in a particular way, not by fighting their way through, not by insisting, but by listening, by attentiveness, and gently still standing up for who God is in their lives. And invite all of us to consider these things as we follow Him.